August 1944. France had just survived a storm. After D-Day, the Allied armies broke out of Normandy and stalled. Not because of the Germans, because of gasoline. General George S. Patton's tanks stood motionless on dusty French roads, empty steel beasts with silent engines, tracks caked in mud, barrels lowered, and beside them, officers with maps and cigarettes, arguing over where all of Europe's fuel had gone. "My men can eat their belts if they have to," Patton growled, "but my tanks damn sure can't run on air." This was a war where fuel was blood, and America had to pump that blood across an entire continent. After the breakout from Normandy, Patton advanced so fast he outran his own supply lines. Ports were wrecked, railroads bombed, and along narrow country roads crawled thousands of overloaded trucks, slow, exhausted, irreplaceable. The American army was a giant, but a giant that thirsted. "We're not fighting the Germans anymore," wrote one supply officer. "We're fighting the map." From their bunkers, German commanders watched in relief. They knew Allied logistics were the weak link. They believed within 2 weeks Patton's tanks would be dry, and then the counterattack would begin. Hitler was sure, without ports and railways, the Americans would grind to a halt. He underestimated the road. On a Normandy map, Major Jenkins of the Transportation Corps drew 2 red circles, Cherbourg and Chartres, and said, "We'll make a road out of trucks." And thus was born the Red Ball Express, an operation where thousands of trucks would drive non-stop from the ports to the front, on a route more than 700 kilometers long. 1 road eastbound, 1 westbound. No stops, no sleep, no mistakes. While the soldiers fought at the front, engineers and drivers fought the distance. They marked the route with red circles, red balls. The symbol meant only one thing: the Army's lifeblood flows here. No one but Red Ball trucks was allowed on that road. "We owned that road," remembered Sergeant James Davis. "From dawn to dusk, it was our battlefield. Every day, the front moved farther. Every day, the distance grew. A single day's delay could freeze the entire war. Generals debated whether to use trains or convoys. Patton cut them off. Trains are for tourists. My army rolls on trucks. Clerks, cooks, mechanics, anyone who could drive, were thrown behind the wheel. In days, chaos became order. 7,000 trucks, 23,000 men, 4 routes, and not a single traffic light. 90% of the drivers were African American. They lived in roadside tents, slept 2 hours a night, and knew the front moved only because of them. "We carried the war on our backs," one veteran said. August 25, 1944. The first Red Ball convoy rolled out, a serpent of engines and dust stretching for miles. Jeeps led the way. Repair trucks followed behind. In every cab, young men gripping the wheel, eyes fixed on the road, cigarettes glowing in the dark. Dust, heat, the smell of fuel. Everything that moved burned. French children waved, and the drivers shouted back, "Keep 'em rolling." The road never slept. Every minute counted. Drivers pushed through rain, night, bombings. Brakes caught fire, tires burst, but the convoys never stopped. Red Ball priority meant even generals waited. The Red Ball had right of way over the war itself. We didn't have guns. Our weapon was speed. From the hills, German observers watched the endless ribbon of motion. In Wehrmacht headquarters, they muttered, "They're insane. They'll burn their engines in a week." A week passed, then another, and the river of trucks still flowed. When the Americans entered Paris, the city didn't first see tanks. It saw trucks. Thousands roared through the Place de la Concorde, hauling fuel, ammunition, bread. Parisians cheered. Patton remarked, "They cheer the tanks, but it's the trucks that win wars." The Red Ball Express was as deadly as any front. Hundreds of vehicles crashed, dozens of drivers died, some from exhaustion, others from enemy fire. But the stream never stopped. If the Red Bull stops, Patton stops. By September 1944, the Red Ball Express delivered over 12,000 tons of supplies daily. It was a logistical miracle. A war turned into engineering. "They said we'd run out of fuel," a staff officer wrote. "Instead, we ran out of roads." One driver wrote home, "We drive day and night. When I look in the mirror, I see a line of trucks that never ends." And indeed, it never did. The road simply changed direction, eastward, across the German border, toward the next chapter of the war, August 1944. The front in Normandy was collapsing, not for the Allies, but for the Germans. Patton's Third Army was moving faster than any strategist had ever dared to imagine. His tanks devoured miles, the Wehrmacht was in retreat, and headquarters struggled to keep maps up to date. But every mile came at a cost. Fuel was running out faster than it could be delivered. Every gallon was worth its weight in gold. "We can take Paris, or we can run dry," Patton said. "But we can't do both." The paradox of Patton's success was that his speed became his enemy. He had advanced so fast that he'd severed himself from his own supply lines. Tankers couldn't keep up, railways lay in ruins, and the bridges across the Loire were choked with the carcasses of burned-out vehicles. For the first time, the U.S. Army wasn't fighting a shortage of men or weapons, but a famine of logistics. In staff meetings, General Omar Bradley urged caution. He reminded everyone that there wasn't enough fuel for two advancing armies. Patton slammed his helmet on the table. "Then give Monty the gas for his parade. I'll take mine for victory." He knew that if the Third Army stopped, the Germans would regroup, and the war could drag on for years. A new kind of officer appeared in headquarters: fuel controllers. They didn't count bullets, they counted gallons. Patton demanded a report for every drop, for every truck. "A tank without gas is just a monument," he told his staff, as he passed rows of silent Shermans. Each night, logistics officers fought their own invisible battle, not with rifles, but with timetables and mileage charts. How many trucks did it take to move 100,000 gallons of fuel a day? Answer: 6,000 vehicles. Each carried 5 tons. Each drove 700 kilometers. Each burned a tenth of its own load just to make the trip. The irony was brutal. To deliver fuel, they had to burn fuel. From the ports of Cherbourg and Saint-Lô, convoys snaked inland toward Le Mans, where makeshift depots, dumps, sprang up. From there, the columns rolled to Chartres, Orléans, and finally east, toward Patton's front. It was the birth of a closed system: 2 roads, 1 endless flow, a heartbeat made of engines, a tactic born from desperation. To keep the lifeline moving, Patton abolished every limit: speed, overload, exhaustion. None of it mattered, only motion. If a truck breaks down, push it off the road and move. Patton's order, August 1944. To him, the war wasn't defined by the front line, but by the supply line. He understood that victory wasn't won in battle, it was delivered. The drivers of the Red Ball Express became his soldiers. Patton visited their depots in person, yelling, joking, swearing, and left them with one line: "You boys are the blood of this army. Don't let it clot." They cheered and laughed. To them, Patton wasn't a distant general. He was the man standing in their dust. Meanwhile, in the east, German intelligence kept asking the same question. How are the Americans still moving? The reports were always the same. They shouldn't be able to. Years later, Heinz Guderian wrote, "We believed logistics would stop them. We did not account for the American obsession with movement." Patton wasn't just a commander. He was a philosopher of motion. In his diary, he wrote, "In war, motion is life. Hesitation is death." Speed, to him, was not just a tactical edge. It was a moral force, a shock that broke the enemy's will. The Red Ball Express embodied that creed. It wasn't a road. It was the nervous system of the war. For the first time, the U.S. Army understood that logistics wasn't delivery. It was combat. Every truck was a soldier. Every can of fuel, a bullet. Supply officers earned medals, some posthumously. Their heroism was invisible. But without them, Patton wouldn't have moved an inch. By early September 1944, Patton was within striking distance of Germany's border. But again, his tanks ran dry. In his journal, he wrote, "We're winning too fast for our own good." As headquarters debated whether to send the next fuel convoy to Patton or Montgomery, the drivers of the Red Ball Express just kept going, hauling gallons that kept the war alive. Patton stood by the roadside, watching the trucks thunder past. He raised his hand in salute and said quietly to his aide, "Those boys are my secret weapon. They carry victory in the back of their trucks." The convoy disappeared over the horizon, leaving only a cloud of golden dust in the late summer sun of 1944, the glow of a war that still refused to stop moving. Morning, August 25th, 1944. On a dusty French road between Cherbourg and Chartres, the air trembles with the roar of engines, the smell of diesel and scorched rubber. The first trucks begin to move. Freshly painted red circles gleam on their sides. No one knows yet this symbol will become legend. They're just following orders to haul fuel, food, and ammunition without stopping, 24 hours a day. That morning, the Red Ball Express was born. We weren't heroes. We were just told, keep it moving. Driver Benjamin Scott, 1944. The term Red Ball came from the American railroads. It meant express trains of the highest priority, never stopping for anything. Now that idea had rolled onto the highways of France. The red circle became the mark of a mission, and the mission, the heartbeat of an army. Every driver knew the rule. If you saw the red ball, pull aside. That wasn't just a truck. It was the war's bloodstream. The U.S. Transportation Corps built a system unlike anything the world had seen. 2 parallel roads, one eastbound, one westbound. One for the front, one for the return. No lights, no stops. Even combat convoys had to yield. "We moved like blood through arteries," recalled driver Samuel Jackson. It was a new kind of army, without guns, but with wheels. 23,000 men, most of them African American, formed a 700-kilometer supply chain. Day and night, the trucks thundered on, a mechanical tide that never ebbed. Men who drove it said the sky itself seemed to vibrate. "It was like thunder that never ended," said one mechanic. Speed was law. Drivers stopped only to refuel or make repairs. Patton's orders were clear. 80 kilometers an hour on the open road, no less than 50 in any weather. Sleep came in snatches behind the wheel. Meals were cold rations and coffee. Their world was motion. Their motto, keep 'em rolling. Most had never fired a weapon, but their job was as dangerous as any battle. They drove over broken bridges, past minefields, under air raids. We didn't fight the Germans. We fought sleep, rain, and time. Every 50 kilometers, Mechanics waited by the roadside, every 100 refueling points. Spare tires, parts, and fuel dumps stood ready, a living organism where, if one artery failed, another took its place. For the first time, the U.S. Army realized that organization itself could be a weapon. Red Ball had its own radio network, short, rhythmic call signs like drumbeats, Red 1, Red 2, rolling south. Convoys reported attacks, breakdowns, and delays. "We were like a train made of dust and noise," another driver said. Sometimes they tuned field radios to jazz just to stay awake. The road had a rhythm, the music of war. While Paris celebrated liberation, the Red Ball drivers slept in muddy roadside tents. They saw no parades, earned no medals, yet without them, the parades would never have happened. A Stars and Stripes correspondent wrote, "The men of Red Ball don't fight for glory, they fight for distance." Red Ball Express quickly became legend. American newspapers called it the highway built by speed. President Roosevelt mentioned the drivers in a broadcast. "They have turned gasoline into victory," and the men believed it, even those driving alone through rain-soaked darkness, believing the whole war balanced on the glow of their headlights. By September 1944, Red Ball Express was hauling over 12,000 tons of supplies a day, the fastest sustained supply line in history. Generals joked that German tanks couldn't retreat as fast as American trucks could deliver fuel. "Our engines outran their fear," wrote Sergeant James Hall. When a reporter asked one driver what kept him going, he said, "When the road ends, we'll stop. Until then, keep it rolling." And the road didn't end. It grew, stretched eastward, becoming the circulatory system of victory, the artery that carried Patton's army through France and toward the gates of Germany. Dawn, August 1944. French roads rumbled like veins under strain. Dust rose like smoke from an invisible fire. In every cab, young faces, tired eyes, hands gripping the wheel as if clinging to life itself. None of them would ever appear on newspaper covers, but without them, there would have been no victory. They were the drivers of the Red Ball Express, the arteries of the army, the living blood of the war. 23,000 men. 90% of them African American. Most had been dock workers, farmers, or students, men whom war turned into mechanics and drivers. They weren't allowed in combat units. They were told, "Your war is behind the lines." But their line became the line of life. We didn't carry medals. We carried gas. Sergeant Melvin Walker. When the road opened in August 1944, each driver was given strict orders. No stopping, no talking, no headlights after dark. A single run could last 12 to 20 hours. They drove through narrow roads, often without maps or signs, following only the faint glow of the truck ahead. We followed the tail light in front of us and prayed it wasn't German. Driver George Taylor. They slept in their cabs, ate cold rations, and brewed coffee on exhaust pipes. Rain, mud, fog. Nothing stopped the flow. Wrecked trucks lined the roadsides, sometimes with bodies still inside. But no one stopped. You looked once, and you kept driving, because if you stopped, the line behind you died. Despite their courage, these men still lived in the shadow of segregation. Separate mess halls, separate barracks, and few mentions in reports or medals. But on the Red Ball Road, color didn't matter. Only speed and survival. On the Red Ball Road, color didn't matter. Only if your truck could roll. To stay awake, they sang. Their songs became the folklore of the road. Rolling with the Red Ball, through the dust and through the rain, If the truck don't make it, I'll walk it just the same. Some painted names on their hoods, Hell on Wheels, Gas or Glory, Old Faithful. Others hung Lucky Charms, dice, pictures of wives, scraps of the American flag. The Red Ball Express wasn't just hard, it was deadly. The roads were slick, the bridges broken, and German scouts hunted convoys. At night, driving without headlights, they guided themselves by the reflection of puddles. One mistake, and a truck plunged into the ditch. If the gas didn't blow, the truck burned anyway. Mechanic James Clay. Their trucks were worn-out beasts, engines stalling mid-run. Mechanics performed miracles, fixing transmissions with tin cans, replacing plugs with wire, binding axles with belts. If you couldn't fix your truck, you didn't drive. There were no spare parts, only ingenuity. On that road, there were no ranks. Officers rode beside privates, and nobody cared about stripes. There was only the convoy. And one rule: don't leave a truck behind. If one broke down, the next pulled it by rope until both reached the depot. We didn't salute, we honked. Among them were women, drivers, medics, radio operators. They drove the same roads, under the same sky. One of them, Marilyn Thomas, wrote home, "They call us angels of the road. I think we're just ghosts, always moving, never stopping." After the war, most returned home, took off their uniforms, and faded quietly into civilian life. They never called themselves heroes. But decades later, historians understood. Without them, Europe would not have been liberated so fast. They fought a different kind of battle, the battle against time. In 1992, on the 50th anniversary of victory, a monument to the Red Ball Express was unveiled in Washington, D.C. Its inscription was simple: "They kept them rolling." And that was all that needed to be said. Because these men did the impossible, they made motion eternal. Night over France, August 1944. The front lay far ahead, but the real war was happening here, on a twisting road where a river of dim light moved through the dark. Headlights were forbidden, only narrow slits of glow under black tape. Everything else was sound: the growl of engines, the squeal of tires, the rattle of steel. Every curve could be the last. We didn't see the road, we felt it. Driver Harry Thompson. The Red Ball Express never stopped. 24 hours a day, no weekends, no pause. As one convoy returned, another rolled out. Over 9,000 runs every single day. The road had become alive, with a pulse, movement, a breath, the sound of engines, and a heart, Patton's tanks waiting somewhere ahead. We were the bloodstream of war. But France in 1944 had no highways, only narrow dirt roads, broken bridges, mud to the axles, and burned-out wrecks. At night, nothing but blackness. Rain turned the world into mirrors. Sometimes the drivers relied on memory alone, remembering the curve of a tree or the feel of a turn, because there was nothing left to see. If you looked too long into the dark started looking back. From above, German Messerschmitts hunted the convoys. Sometimes they mistook them for front-line units. The attacks came without warning. Bombs, fire, chaos. Drivers dove into ditches, hid beneath their trucks, then climbed back in and kept going. We drove through hell, and hell moved with us. The worst enemy wasn't the Luftwaffe. It was the night itself. Fog could erase the world in seconds. Convoys broke apart. Some men drove alone for hours, believing everyone else was gone. In that solitude, fear became sound. Every creak a mine, every shadow an ambush. But one command echoed in their minds: keep 'em rolling. According to army records, every 2 hours, One Red Bull truck crashed. Sleep behind the wheel, wet brakes, exhaustion. Dozens died without ever seeing the enemy, burned, drowned, or lost to the mud. But the road did not mourn. An hour later, the next convoy passed over the same ground. We buried the trucks in the mud and kept going. Every 50 kilometers stood a repair station. Mechanics worked non-stop, covered in oil, deafened by engines and radio chatter. A tire change took 7 minutes. An engine fix, less than an hour. They called themselves the pit crews of war. And truly, the Red Bull Express was a race with no finish line. The convoys spoke in radio rhythm. Red 1 rolling, Red 2 clear, Red 3 fuel drop confirmed. At night, the static became music. Sometimes the stations played jazz, Miles Davis, Duke Ellington, so drivers wouldn't fall asleep. The road sounded like an old record, its needle made of steel and fire. Many trucks carried double loads, 10 tons of fuel, sometimes more, to save a single trip. Axles bent, wheels burst, no one complained. We didn't measure miles, we measured gallons. Every minute gained on that road was a minute stolen from the Germans. After a week, most drivers said they stopped feeling fatigue. The road became hypnosis, the tail light ahead, a star to follow. If I stopped, I'd disappear, one veteran recalled years later. That addiction to motion bound them all. They couldn't stand still. They had to move. By September, the Red Bull route stretched over 700 kilometers, hundreds of bridges, thousands of signs, tens of depots, and repair hubs. No wartime project expanded faster. The Americans had built the first motorized logistics system in history, a blueprint for every future military operation. We built the first superhighway of war. At dawn, the road never slept. The sun rose over endless dust, and the horizon itself seemed to move. French villagers stood along the roadside, taking off their hats, waving at the roaring columns. They didn't know where the trucks were going, only that this road led to freedom. A driver returning from a run wrote in his notebook, "The road never sleeps. When I close my eyes, I still see the lights." And indeed, the Red Bull Express became more than a supply route. It was a symbol of unstoppable motion, a rhythm that refused to rest until the war itself ran out of road. September 1944. Europe trembled under the roar of engines. American tanks advanced faster than even German propaganda could keep up. Every mile conquered was paid for not in bullets, but in gasoline. In every tank, dozens of gallons. In every gallon, the lifeblood of the Red Bull Express. They said the Germans had the blitz. We had the fuel. Patton's staff officer. On Allied maps, the front line was no longer drawn with arrows, but with pipelines, routes of supply, arteries of movement. Every day, General Patton demanded not reports of battles, but numbers, gallons, kilometers, hours to the next depot. "Gasoline is more valuable than blood," he declared in early September. The Red Bull Express was no longer just a transport route. It was part of the offensive itself. Convoys synchronized with the advance. Each driver knew exactly where the armored divisions would be in 6 hours, 12, 24. It was the first real-time logistical operation in military history. From the air, Allied pilots described a living constellation on the move, roads glowing like rivers of headlights and sparks. Every truck a cell in a massive organism connecting coast to front. It was as if the continent itself was moving east. Recon pilot, 9th Air Force. In August, The US Army burned 800,000 gallons of fuel per day. By September, over 1 million. Every drop passed through the hands of Red Ball drivers. Fuel became not a resource, but a symbol of time. Every gallon pushed the war closer to its end. Patton's Shermans came back to life. Columns of steel rolled across France like waves of fire and thunder, crushing resistance, capturing bridges, moving faster than even their commander expected. Patton's blitz didn't run on courage, wrote Time magazine in 1945. It ran on diesel. On the Eastern Front, chaos. German HQs lost contact. Maps became meaningless. Field Marshal Model reported to Berlin. The Americans are advancing without pause. Their tanks do not rest. Hitler demanded to know how this was possible with the ports still in ruins. No one could explain that under his nose ran a new kind of road, a road where gasoline moved at the speed of thought. The Red Ball Express changed the spirit of the army. Every soldier who saw a truck with a red circle felt hope return. When Red Ball showed up, we knew we could keep going. Sergeant John Burroughs' 3rd Armored Division. Now Red Ball convoys rolled with the tanks. Drivers delivered fuel under fire, their cabs armored with scrap steel, sandbags strapped to windshields. We were the front line, with no guns. They went where artillery couldn't reach, and their courage made blitzkrieg possible again. This time for the Allies. Patton turned motion into ideology. He told his officers, "Don't plan too far ahead. Just keep going. The road will catch up." And it did. The Red Ball Express was that road, chasing the front, while the front chased victory. Engineers began laying temporary pipelines along the convoy routes. Fuel flowed directly to roadside depots, turning the highways into rivers of energy. It was the first modular logistics network ever built, the blueprint for modern military supply chains born in the dust, noise, and diesel of 1944. By late September, Patton's Third Army crossed the Moselle. His divisions surged eastward, 30 kilometers a day, unstoppable. The Germans couldn't regroup fast enough. They thought we'd stop. We never did. Red Ball driver, letter home, 1944. But the price was heavy. Every day, trucks broke down, drivers died in crashes, mechanics worked through the night. Still, no one complained. They all knew one truth. Speed was survival. The faster we moved, the shorter the war. One photograph from that autumn says it all. Tankers and truckers side by side, passing a jerry can hand to hand. Dust, smiles, exhaustion, unity. The caption beneath it read, "The Blitz drinks from the Red Ball." And on the battered roads of France, Patton proved a truth that would outlive the war. Victory belongs not only to the men who fight, but to those who keep the world moving. Berlin, late August 1944. In the halls of the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the German High Command, an eerie silence reigned. Teletypes clattered, but the numbers didn't make sense. The Americans were moving too fast. General Alfred Jodl frowned. "It's impossible. They're moving faster than their supplies." His aide hesitated. "Herr General, they've found a way to move the fuel itself." He wasn't exaggerating. After D-Day, Hitler had been certain. The American army would collapse under its own logistics. "They bring war like tourists, with all their machines," he had mocked. "But roads and gas will bury them." By late 1944, German strategy rested on exhaustion. Starve the enemy's tanks, and the front would freeze. But Hitler didn't know that, beneath the fields of Normandy, a new civilization was roaring to life. A civilization of wheels. The Luftwaffe tried to uncover the secret. Reconnaissance pilots reported endless convoys, massive lines of trucks stretching to the horizon along the roads of Chartres, Alençon, and Cherbourg. Their intelligence officers coined a phrase, an autobahn made of trucks. German engineers calculated that at such consumption rates, the Americans should have run dry in 10 days. A month later, they were still rolling. Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, studied captured reports of the Red Ball Express. He admitted in a briefing, "They have turned our idea against us." To the Germans, Blitzkrieg had been an art of motion and precision. Now the Americans had proved it could be done not through tanks, but through fuel. The road itself has become a weapon, Guderian would later write in his memoirs. Meanwhile, German units on the eastern and western fronts were starving for gasoline. Every liter was precious. Tanks sat idle. Planes couldn't take off. Soldiers pushed trucks by hand, replaced engines with horse carts. The contrast was unbearable. While America moved at the speed of the motor, Germany had returned to the speed of the march. The Americans have wheels. We have boots. Graffiti found in a German command post near Reims, Berlin's propaganda could not explain it. Radio broadcasts insisted that American convoys are exhausted, that their tanks are abandoned. But soldiers at the front heard something else, the low thunder of engines, and saw the shimmering dust of Patton's Shermans breaking through Metz and Nancy. The enemy comes not with guns, but with gasoline. At the start of September, German commanders predicted the Americans wouldn't cross the Loire. A week later, Patton was at the Moselle. 2 weeks after that, at Germany's border. Every German forecast failed. For one reason, they counted kilometers, while Patton counted gallons. They fought with math. We fought with maps. General Hasso von Manteuffel, Memoirs, 1947. For years, Germany had believed itself the master of mechanized war, of speed, order, and precision. Now those same virtues had turned against them. They watched in disbelief as their own philosophy of movement as power returned in American form, a fleet of trucks that never tired. We built a god of motion, and the Americans stole it from us. Letter from a German officer to his family, 1944. By September, despair had set in at every headquarters. They realized they had lost not the battlefield, but time. While they measured distances, America measured hours. Their trucks defeated our tanks. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring. In October, German commandos tried to ambush the Red Bull convoys, but the flow was too dense, the rhythm too relentless. A captured saboteur later admitted, "We blew up one truck. 10 more came before the smoke cleared." The Red Ball Express had become a force of nature, a storm of steel and dust that could not be stopped. By November 1944, Germany's Economic Command issued its grim conclusion. The Americans have solved logistics. It was a death sentence for the Reich's strategy. Hitler's armies had lost to something they could not comprehend: organization itself. They fight with schedules, not soldiers, one officer sneered, but behind the sarcasm was fear. For the first time in history, war had become a system, a machine of movement and math. A captured German lieutenant told an American major, "We waited for you to stop, but you never did." The major smiled. "That's because we don't stop for anyone." And it was true. The Red Ball Express didn't just break German predictions. It broke the very logic of war. From that moment on, victory would belong not to those with the most guns, but to those who could keep moving. France. Autumn 1944. The roads of the Red Ball Express no longer gleamed. They were scarred, torn asphalt, sagging bridges, rutted earth carved by millions of tires, and thousands of stories that ended mid-journey. You could smell death and diesel, recalled mechanic Clarence Davis, and they both burned the same. The Red Ball Express never rested. Each driver covered 300 to 400 kilometers a day. Engines died, brakes melted, men fainted behind the wheel. Out of 7,000 trucks, an average of 500 broke down every day. Some simply vanished into ditches, rivers, or smoke. If your truck stopped, you prayed the next guy didn't hit you. The front line wasn't just drawn on maps. It ran along this road. Every kilometer was a battlefield, not against Germans, but against time and death. Drivers fought exhaustion, adrenaline, and their own bodies. Sleep became an enemy. Sleep kills more than Germans. Staff report, October 1944. They drove when they couldn't see. When windshields turned to mud, they leaned out into the storm, guiding themselves by sound, by the smell of exhaust, by the vibration of the earth beneath them. You learned to drive by sound. One driver said he could recognize the truck ahead just by the whine of its gearbox. It wasn't driving anymore. It was survival by instinct. Every day, someone died. Crashes, fires, fuel explosions. Officially, over 500 men of the Red Ball Express were killed in just 2 months, but many names were never recorded. Some remained under the road itself. No crosses, no photos, no words. The road was our graveyard, said Sergeant Leon Rivers. There were no medals, no parades. When a driver was lost, another took the wheel, without ceremony, without pause. Every death became part of the schedule. The convoy could not stop, not even for its own dead. We mourned with our engines on. At each Red Ball station, medics and mechanics waited. When they heard the screech of brakes in the distance, they knew. Someone hadn't made it. They pulled bodies from burning cabs, patched frames, and bandaged hands. An hour later, the same driver, or his replacement, was back on the road. There was no rotation, just the road and you. Hallucinations became common. Lights that weren't there, trees turning into men, the road looping endlessly. One diary read, "Sometimes I thought I was driving in circles, like the world had only one road. It was a new kind of war, one fought inside the mind." In letters recovered from Red Ball archives, the same phrases appear again and again. "Mom, I'm tired. The road doesn't end. We keep going, because if we stop, it's over." They never asked for glory. They only wanted to be remembered, to know someone understood that their work was not delivery, but sacrifice. By autumn, the roads turned to mud. Fuel spilled and mixed with rain. Trucks slid sideways. Cold seeped through uniforms. Sometimes engines froze on the road, and drivers huddled beside them until dawn, hands pressed to the metal for warmth. The road was our fire and our coffin. Death became part of the timetable. If morning passed without losses, everyone knew evening would bring them. It wasn't fear, it was arithmetic. Still, no one stopped. Because if one truck stopped, the whole army stopped. Few journalists ever saw the route. They never heard the endless drone inside the cab where the engine drowned the heartbeat. They never saw the hands that clung to the wheel even in sleep. "We were the ghosts of war," wrote a driver in 1946. "Always moving, never seen." Years later, one survivor summed it up. "We lost more men to exhaustion than to enemy fire, but no one stopped, because the road had to live." And it did. That road lived, fed by fuel and by lives, its every mile paid for in pain. But it was that pain that kept Patton's army moving all the way to the end of the war. Autumn 1944. Europe had changed. Where battles raged only months before, now endless Allied convoys rolled east, roads, towns, and fields humming with the heartbeat of engines. Patton was once again in front. His tanks moved at a speed no one thought possible, and even his own staff couldn't explain how they hadn't yet run out of fuel. "If there is a miracle in this war," said General Eisenhower, "it's the men who keep our army moving." The Red Ball Express was no longer just a supply route. It was a river of fire, feeding a steel avalanche. Every day, over 12,000 tons of cargo. Every hour, thousands of gallons of gasoline flowing like blood through the veins of an army. American forces stormed through Metz, cut across the Argonne forest, and reached the Siegfried Line. The Germans could no longer fight back. Their tanks were out of fuel, their artillery out of shells, while the Americans never stopped. We didn't push them back. They just couldn't run fast enough. By December 1944, the Red Ball Express had crossed France, from the beaches of Normandy to the German frontier. It was a living network of depots, pipelines, and convoys stretching across a continent. Soldiers called it the Highway to the Rhine. It wound through towns and villages, past fields and ruins, and everywhere it passed, people watched history move. The army and its logistics had fused into one being. A tank without fuel was useless, but a truck without a front line was meaningless. "We didn't just support the war," said one Red Ball officer. "We were the war." In 82 days, the Red Ball Express delivered 412,000 tons of cargo, 11 million gallons of fuel, 5 million rations, and medical supplies. Each gallon brought the war closer to its end. Patton's speed forced the Allies themselves to rethink strategy. Patton didn't wait for permission. He waited for fuel. To the French, the Red Ball Express was La Route de la Liberté, the road of freedom. When the convoys entered liberated cities, people lined the streets, handing flowers, bread, and water to the drivers. "They brought food before the Red Cross did," remembered a woman from Reims. The trucks with red circles painted on their sides became symbols of hope and of a new kind of warfare, where motion itself meant life. March 1945. Patton's army reached the Rhine, the final barrier before Germany. Crossing it would take the impossible: thousands of tons of fuel, bridges, and engineers. Once again, the Red Ball Express led the way. They brought it all, from jerry cans to explosives. At night, under fire, drivers hauled supplies for pontoon bridges. Within 24 hours, Patton's forces had crossed the Rhine. Red Ball got us to the Rhine before the Germans even knew we were there. Movement became music. Engines drummed, tires struck rhythm, radios sang in code. It was an orchestra of survival, each note a heartbeat. "We weren't soldiers," wrote one driver. "We were a heartbeat made of steel." And it was true. The Red Ball Express pulsed like a living heart. Without it, the tanks wouldn't move, the cities wouldn't be freed, and victory would never arrive. In March 1945, German intelligence reports included a chilling line: "Enemy mobility exceeds prediction." It was a quiet surrender of understanding. They couldn't fathom how a war could move at the speed of a machine. "Our calculations failed. Their movement is endless." From the archives of Guderian's staff. When Germany collapsed, the Red Ball Express stopped. For the first time in 83 days, the roads fell silent. Engines cooled. But for those who drove, the silence felt unnatural. "After the war, I couldn't sleep," said driver Frank Morgan. It was too quiet. In the last photograph of the operation, a line of trucks rolls into a German town. Children wave flags. Soldiers smile. Every truck bears the same red circle, and beneath it a chalked message: "Victory delivered." It wasn't just a slogan, it was the truth. The Red Ball Express didn't just deliver fuel, it delivered victory. Spring 1945. Germany had surrendered. For the first time in months, the roads of Europe, those veins of steel and dust, fell silent. The tire tracks remained. The signs that read "Red Ball Route" still hung crooked on posts. And here and there, soldiers walked alone, trying to understand where this endless road had finally brought them. The road stopped, but in our heads, the engines never did. Driver Harold Brooks. After the war, the Red Ball Express became a legend, but only in staff reports. Newspapers praised generals and victories, not the men who carried those victories on their backs. Out of 23,000 drivers, only a handful received medals. The rest came home without honors, without fanfare, only with exhaustion and memories. They called us drivers, but we were builders of victory. Sergeant James Hall. Yet in the Pentagon, one truth had already settled. This could never be forgotten. The Red Ball Express became the blueprint for all modern military supply chains, from Korea to Iraq. The U.S. Army learned something eternal. Speed and organization outweigh any weapon. Logistics wins wars, not glory. U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps Report, 1946. In the 1960s, historians re-examined the role of black soldiers in World War II. It turned out that over 70% of Red Ball drivers were African American, and they had literally kept Europe moving. Their performance became an argument in the fight to end racial segregation in the U.S. military. When President Truman signed the desegregation order in 1948, one line in the justification read, "The performance of the Red Ball drivers proved equality through action." By the 1950s, U.S. military training bases built new convoy practice courses, known as Red Ball routes. Young soldiers were taught not just how to shoot, but how to move. We don't teach logistics, we teach movement. General Dwight B. Myers, 1953. Civil engineers inspired by Red Ball's efficiency designed a nationwide highway network, the Interstate Highway System. President Eisenhower, who had commanded the Allied armies, said, "The highways that unite America were born from the roads that freed Europe." The Red Ball Express had become more than a wartime story. It was the foundation of modern logistics. The men of Red Ball never marched in victory parades. They stood in the shadows while tanks and officers passed by. But their story returned decades later. At the U.S. Army Quartermaster Museum in Fort Lee, Virginia, a glass case bears the simple inscription, "Red Ball Express, they kept them rolling." Inside, a dusty helmet, a worn leather glove, and a black and white photograph of a convoy vanishing into the horizon. For those who lived it, the sound of engines never faded. One driver said, 30 years later, "Every time I hear a truck start, I see France again." They hadn't sought fame. It was enough to know that when the world was collapsing, they kept it on wheels. In the 1980s, Hollywood made a film about them, but the veterans smiled bitterly. It wasn't Hollywood. It was dust, gas, and ghosts. Still, their story reached a new generation. People began to understand that wars are not won only by those who fight, but by those who keep the world moving. The Red Ball Express became a symbol of endurance, of the American spirit itself, to keep moving forward through exhaustion, pain, and resistance. The road was our classroom. It taught us that freedom moves. Driver Ernest Brown. In 1992, the surviving veterans of Red Ball returned to France. They were in their 70s. Once again, they drove the old route from Cherbourg to Chartres. On bridges, French school children waved. Old villagers cried out, "Merci, Red Ball." "We didn't come back for medals," said one. "We came back to hear the engines one last time." In Washington, D.C., at the World War II Memorial, a bronze sculpture was unveiled in 2009. 3 drivers, a steering wheel, a jerry can, and the Red Ball emblem. At its base, the words read, "They delivered victory." Thousands of visitors pass by every year, most not realizing that without these drivers, the war might have lasted years longer. The Red Ball Express no longer exists as a road, but its spirit lives on. In every truck, in every highway, in every soldier who knows that movement is life. The war ended. The road did not.